So kia ora koutou, I'm Bruce, some of you know me. And we've got a mayoral debate downstairs, so you could be here listening to the new mayor. Won't say anything more about that, but got my fingers crossed. So anyway, so thanks for coming. So obviously it's a huge topic, and street art, it's just massive. So I've just chosen to sort of focus on one or two aspects of it. And how did an old guy like me, get involved? Well, the answer was in 2005 I was asked to paint a mural in Wellington to go around the edge of a building site, and once I painted that one, I got asked to paint another one, and it all sort of carried on from there, and I sort of got involved. So that's sort of how I got interested in it. So I'm just going to bump through a whole lot of slides and just sort of talk about each one, and this is sort of my interpretation of how sort of graffiti sort of metamorphosized into sort of street art, which I would argue is the modern art movement. We had sort of postmodernism, and we had sort of modernism, and we had realism, futurism, and at the moment sort of street art is the thing. Although most street artists I know don't want to call it street art, they just want to call it art. So anyway, this first image here is it's actually some markings made by a bear on a tree. And so bears go around in the forest and they claw the trees, and the higher up the markings are, the bigger, there's a big bear around. And if you can't reach up that high and you see there's markings higher than you are, then probably not a good spot to hang around. And so I would argue that marking your territory is like an instinctive thing that animals and humans do, and always have done. So this next picture is in one of the French caves, I can't remember which one. And so most of these French cave paintings, they're not just in France, or other parts of Europe as well, but a lot of them are centred in France, were done about 20,000 years ago. We don't know why people chose to go into the caves and paint. It was quite a dangerous thing to do because there were cave bears that also lived there. In fact, some of the paintings have got cave bear claw marks over the top of them. And so why people went in there in the dark with torches, risking attacks by cave bears to do these paintings, we really can't know. People make all sorts of maybe it was about hunting, getting better hunting or relationship with animals, but we don't know. We can't ask those people. It was 20,000 years ago, but a lot of the work they were doing was absolutely fantastic, considering the conditions they were doing it under. So there seems to be this instinctive drive to create markings and art. And so now we sort of rush forwards into about 100 AD, and we're in Pompeii in Italy, and you might remember Vesuvius erupted in AD 90, covering the town in ash. And this is actually political graffiti on the wall of a building, saying, vote for so-and-so. So pretty much like what's happening downstairs today. This was political advertising, just scrawled on the walls of buildings. And obviously they did some nice murals as well. So graffitio is actually an Italian word. So this is when the word really came into being in this period. So this is some more graffiti, and this was actually somewhere up in the Orkney Islands, where some Vikings had come in the 9th century and invaded one of the Saxon era tombs, and looking for plunder, and basically tagged it, like Leroy was here, whatever it is, basically just written their name as like sort of disused with the locals. And so graffiti is often been used as just that thing saying, I was here. That's almost like the prime motivation for a lot of graffiti in the past and still today. So this is a bit of graffiti from one of my favourite churches in England, at Beechamwell St Mary in Norfolk, near where my grandparents lived. And the church was built in about the 11th century, and around about 1340 some repairs were done, and somebody carved in and it's thought it was one of the people doing repairs, a picture, and people call it the Beechamwell Devil, but I think it's actually Hearn the Hunter. And so it's actually one of the locals saying, hey, we're not up with this Christianity, we're still following the old religion, thank you. And unfortunately this church almost burned to the ground the other day, so hopefully it can be repaired. So people have been doing graffiti for a long, long time. And in New Zealand, of course, we had this wonderful tradition of when the first people came here from around Rarotonga, around about 700 or 800 years ago, and came down to the South Island to hunt moa. They would travel up the rivers in the summer and hunt moa and the eggs and the meat, and then bring them down the rivers. And often they would stay in caves en route, and they would put these beautiful drawings on their way, and a lot of these are in Otago and Canterbury. And of course, unfortunately, we've got modern people tagged over the top of them, which is why a lot of them now have got giant ugly fences over the top of them. So when I was growing up, in 1980 I was 17, and a lot of the graffiti that was being done then was either about people promoting their bands, or it was political. And all it was someone going around with a spray can, because spray cans are very fast, and putting up something very, very quickly. And it was all words, there was no pictures back then, or very few, and it was just get in there, get out before the cops came along. And so this is a war memorial in Auckland, and somebody's written death cult underneath. This is a bit of local Dunedin graffiti. So also graffiti was, once again, it was about territory, it was about gangs. So this is one of the local gangs saying that they were here. And then the opposite pole to all of that, of people rushing around at night with spray cans, was the professional mural artist. So these are people that had gone to art school, and they had been trained. And they had permission to paint on the buildings, and paid money to do so. So this is Moore Wilson's in Wellington, and I actually watched the guy paint this in about 1991, and he spent ages painting the outside of the building with these products that are actually, that Moore Wilson sold. And this is actually sort of like an illusion that Moore Wilson's put in, of like an earthquake as well. So that was like a bit of street art itself. And so there was a graffiti artist, illegal, and there was the professional mural artist, that was legal. So this is another pretty recent mural, which I think is in New Plymouth from memory. And this is actually a flat wall, and the technique's called trompe d'oeil. Excuse my terrible execrable French, someone might be able to pronounce that a lot better than me. And it basically means full eye. And so there's been a long tradition going back in history of people doing these murals to make buildings look bigger than they are, to enhance interior spaces. And so this is a completely flat wall, apart from this person here and this box. The rest of it is just completely flat. So there was, as I keep saying, there was just the illegal criminals and the professional artists. And so what led to graffiti, becoming street art? And so I'm saying there was, this is my theory anyway, there was 5 main things. And one of them was the invention of the spray can. And this happened in around about 1949, when a guy whose name, I'm always forgetting his name, Edward Seymour, invented the spray can. So there were actual spray cans before that, but nobody had thought about filling them with paint. A lot of people don't actually credit Edward, they credit his wife Bonnie for coming up with this idea. So we're going to say that Bonnie Seymour was the inventor of the spray can, the paint spray can. But it's often Edward that gets the credit. I actually thought I had a photo. There he is there, so that's Edward. no pictures of Bonnie, unfortunately. And so the next thing, number 2, is there was this period in America, particularly in New York, in an area called the Bronx, that got extremely depressed in the 1970s. And this is like an urban area, and it was largely filled with Afro-American people, poor people, and they knew they were probably going to knock it all down and build like giant motorways and apartments and things. And so in the 70s, it was just left to rot. And it became like a ghetto in New York, and also at that point, New York was on a complete verge of bankruptcy. And so this is where street art really started to emerge. And what happened was, excuse me, Edward, a lot of gangs developed in that area, a lot of young people, very disenfranchised. They had nothing, there's no jobs, no money, they had nothing to do, and so they formed gangs. And some of them started writing, and they called it writing back then. They didn't call it tagging, they didn't call it bombing, they called it writing. They started writing on trains. So here's a guy called Dondi, who was one of the first sort of what we call street art kings, bombing a train. So they used to go to the train yards at night, just used to break in and paint the trains while they were stationary, and they would try and do the whole carriage. And because a lot of them were in gangs, if they went to another neighbourhood, they might get beaten up or killed, but they could see their train moving around town, and so it was a way for them to sort of like escape their territory, you know, even though they were sort of stuck there. And it was also like a status thing. It was like, you know, who could paint the best carriage? And obviously they got a big kick out of seeing their carriages actually running, and at the same time there'd be a big crew of people working for the railways buffing them out all the time. So here's Dondi at work again. He became one of the most famous people working in the period. Here he is with his cans, working at night. And a lot of this stuff was sort of very underground. This is happening in the 1970s until a book came out by Martha Cooper and a guy called Henry Chalfont in 1984 called Subway Art. And there's actually a really good documentary on one of the streaming channels about it at the moment, which is well worth looking at, which explores this sort of early period of writing that became bombing, that became, you know, what we call now as graph. And so here's one of Dondi's carriages traveling through New York. So this is in the 1970s, and a lot of people started taking notice of this. You know, this was a whole new phenomenon, and artists started getting inspired by what was coming out of the Bronx. And now this has become an established style, and for a while it was called bombing, and now most people call it graph. So this is a pretty recent picture I took in Paris. So there's a lot of street artists work in this medium, and graph has become quite sort of pictorial. It's like where you turn like letters into pictures. So here's another piece in Wellington. There was a wall in Wellington where a lot of the local artists used to practice on. And often the graph has got people's names in it. So in this case, the name is Kasich. And you've got a couple of Mike Myers sharks with frickin' laser beams on their heads to sort of spice it up a bit. If anyone remembers that movie with the Mike Myers with the sharks with the frickin' laser beams on their head. And this is one by Sean Duffel, who's a local artist. This is Arrow Valley in Wellington. So Sean moved up to Wellington in early 2000s, and has had quite a successful career since then. And this is one of my favourite pieces of his. And a lot of people in the community, you know, really loved this piece, you know, because it spoke to the community. It wasn't just him putting up his name; it was him like giving back to the community. And that's what I think a lot of like good street art is. And so the third thing that I'm saying had a huge influence on turning graffiti into street art was some famous artists started getting involved. And so these are artists who, they may not have been to art school, but they had a sort of artistic sensibility, they had a bit of money behind them, and they were white. So this is Keith Haring, and he would go down the train stations at night, and he noticed that when they took away an advert, they would just leave a black bit of paper. So he started doing these chalk drawings on them. and he would go down every night and try and find these empty invert spaces and draw on them. And he got really famous in, I think it was 1986, 86, when he went to the Berlin Wall and did this giant piece on the Berlin Wall. And this helped to really put him over, and he became a highly sought after artist, and his work now commands millions of dollars. Sadly, he died in the 90s of AIDS, very young. And another person is Jean-Michel Basquiat, who is Haitian American artist who started off doing basically what we would call today, I guess, sort of tagging, but it was very sort of ironic and sort of postmodern tags around New York. And he came to the attention of people like Warhol, and then started painting on canvas. And his work also commands absolutely millions of dollars now. But he started on the street, and unfortunately, like Hearing, he also died very, very young. So neither of these guys, unfortunately, are still around. So, going to talk now about just moving up to the fourth thing. But before I get there, I'll talk about a character called Black Lorette. So I'm going to talk about Banksy, but before I talk about Banksy, I want to talk about Black Lorette. So Black Lorette was a Parisian artist who went to New York in the 80s and saw what was going on and thought, hey, I'd like to take that back to Paris. But I'm not a very good painter, I can't paint like these guys, but I can use stencils. And so this isn't a Banksy, this is a Black Lorette. And so at various times, Banksy, who I'm saying is number 4 of the things that made graffiti turn into street art, acquired a lot of his influence from Black Lorette. And sometimes Banksy has acknowledged this, and other times he's sort of gone back on it. But I'm saying this sort of stencil technique leading into the work of Banksy. So Banksy, more than anyone, has sort of made street art legitimate, and it's something that people have heard of, and people starting to accept. And that rather than painting that work over grey, we're gonna actually try and preserve it, and actually we're going to acknowledge it's a work of art now, not a bit of graffiti. And Banksy, a bit like Hearing, became famous for this work that he did in when did he do this one? It was about 2005, yeah. So this was on one of the walls separating the West Bank and Gaza from the Israeli territories, and he did a whole series of work there in 2005, sort of commenting, on the separation, a bit like the way Hearing had hit the Berlin Wall, and it's helped to make Banksy famous, as well as his interventions on paintings and art galleries, etc., where he'd go and install one of his own works. So Banksy, massive influence, and he also did sculptures obviously as well as paintings. And the thing that really put Banksy over was this movie called Exit Through the Gift Shop. And this is like a bit of a how-to guide of how to become a street artist. Came out probably at least 10, 12 years ago now. And it was almost like a primer of how to be a street artist. And so it didn't just have Banksy in it, had other famous street artists like Shepard Fairey and Vader, and had a massive influence on just blowing the scene wide open. And people just saw what was possible. So the fifth thing that I think helped turn graffiti into street art was the internet. So previously, if you did a great bit of work somewhere on a wall, the only people would see it as the locals. And pretty soon, it might get buffed out, someone would try and paint it over. But now with cameras and the internet, you take a photo and it's up there forever. And there's certain sites like Worcester, Brooklyn Street Art, and you get your work on those sites, and you're immediately recognised. And even if the work's buffed over, there's still a strong record of it. So just going to talk about tagging very briefly. So tagging really sort of started taking off in New Zealand in the 90s, and like the stuff in the 80s, a lot of it was gang related. So this is actually my car in Wellington, and it's been clobbered by a local teenage street gang, the 42s, and it relates to the local bus route. There was also the 44s. And so it's really like the turf thing, and Instagram's had a lot to do with the Hagen community, so a lot of them have got their Instagram accounts, and it's like, you know, how big can we go, you know, how high can we go, how annoying can we be, and it's like a big FU to the arts community. And there's some people that think, like, to become a street artist, you need to go through this sort of school of being a tagger before you become a street artist, and other people like myself who don't have that. Well, actually, I do have a little bit of a background of doing illegal work, but I don't think it's necessary. You know, I think you can go to art school and become a legitimate, you know, street artist. So this is what we see a lot of around town, and to a lot of us, it is just annoying rubbish. But you do gain an appreciation for it once you start to understand the language of it. And so obviously I paint murals, so I call my street art murals. I'm not a street artist, I'm a muralist or just an artist. And people tag over my work sometimes, and I don't let it bother me because I see like they've got just as much legitimacy to operate in the street as I do, even though most of my work is legal and theirs is not. I still see this as public space. So that's just, you know, we could talk. I could do a whole talk about graph, but you know we don't have time. So I'm just crashing through a whole lot of subjects. So by the early 2000s, street art has started becoming a really big thing. You know, for those 5 reasons that I mentioned, and it started getting really big as people learned to use like huge bits of equipment, you know, and do these massive pieces. So this is a guy called Arise. He's one of my favourite artists in Madrid. So this is like about a 5 or 6 story building, and it just, nobody was really doing work on this sort of scale really before the early 2000s, and suddenly it just took off. So this is Roa, who's got a work in Dunedin, we'll talk about in a moment, who's a Belgian artist who now lives in England. Someone may be able to correct me. He's Belgian, isn't he, Roa, originally? Yeah. He had a really tough upbringing on the streets, and often with famous works, there's got a whole lot of other people have done their own little works around it, including my friend Citizen Kane with his 3D stuff here, and this is called barnacling, where you put your own little works up next to famous works, because you know this is going to get Instagram to hell, and if you've got your own little work up next to it, you're going to sort of barnacle off the back of it. So this is a friend of mine, Irony, although his real name's John, and this is one of his pieces in Sunderland. So I met him at a street art festival in Sunderland in the north of England, and he paints pictures of young ladies that he's attracted to, takes their photographs and does these massive paintings. This is about a 4-story high building, and sadly shortly afterwards it was knocked down. So street art, you know, a lot of it is very ephemeral, it doesn't last long, it's not like a painting in a gallery, it's not there forever. And so this is Roa in Dunedin. So in about 2017 or 2016, 2014, this is that old. Okay, so this is the first piece really that was done by the Dunedin Street Art group, which was really started by a guy called Glenn Hazelton, Justin Cashel, who are a couple of local guys that work for the council, and they looked around for some money and started to bring out overseas professionals to start working in Dunedin and turn Dunedin into what it is now, you know, with all these fantastic murals. So we haven't got the council to thank for this. We've got a lot of hard work from a group of dedicated individuals who have done all this fundraising to get all this work up. And so Roa, this is the very first one. And then this is Dallas. So this was about 2016, 17, wasn't it? Was that early? Was okay. Getting in. So Victoria here knows, she does the Dunedin street art tours, Victoria. So yeah, she should probably be doing this talk rather than me. So this is my favourite piece in Dunedin. This is his technique. I think it's absolutely wonderful. Yeah, I just think it's sublime. It's the top work in town as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, so the council likes to take credit for this work, but if anything, they've done more to hinder it than help it. This is Flem, who is a buddy of mine in Victoria. He's a lovely, lovely guy who's been out to Dunedin 3 times and painted. He's got a bit busy recently having children, and of course COVID hasn't helped. So this is on the side of the Musos Club, and this is a guy playing an instrument that releases birds, and it relates to the fact that the building is the Musos Club, and a pet shop had just closed right here. And so a lot of good street art to me, it relates to the history of the local area. It's not just banging up something random, it's somebody talking about, you know, the local history, and it's got local relevance, and the locals, you know, they get it, they understand it. And so, how big can you go? Well, so this is one of Flem's pieces on the west coast of Australia, invited out for a street art festival there, and this is a door. So I'm not sure how high this is, like 30 metres or something, might be more. And it was done with a massive lift. So that's him standing on top of the lift. And so he actually needed an operator to be with him to do this one because of the restrictions and regulations. But most artists learn how to use this equipment themselves as part of the deal of doing the work. You need to get certified on this sort of equipment. But this is on a huge scale, and there's an area in West Australia where they've got these giant silos where they've invited artists out to do these giant works. So this is Sean Duffel, I mentioned before, working in Otago, Dunedin with the tools of the trade, the spray can, the mask, and his scissor lift. So now I'm just going to talk about a few other sorts of street art. So it's not just all about sort of rock stars and spray cans. There's other things that you can do as well. And this is a work by a guy popularly known as Chewing Gum Man, although his real name is Ben. And he's about my age. A lot of street artists, you know, are not necessarily teenagers. You know, a lot of them are, you know, all different sorts of ages and genders and things. So Ben's about my age. And he paints on flat bits of chewing gum around England, mainly around London, but he's done them all over the country. And so where somebody stood under a chewing gum, he comes along and he's got a little kerosene burner and he dries it. He's got his enamel paints and he paints on it and then he dries it again and then he puts urethane on. And he told me last time I saw him, he'd done about 6,000 of these around London. So this is him painting one in Sunderland. He's unemployed and he just does this, it's just his lifestyle. So occasionally he'll do little commissions and, you know, get into a gallery or something, but he doesn't care about any of that. It occupies his day, you know, stops him from, you know, getting drunk or whatever, taking drugs. This is his lifestyle. And a lot of street artists is like that. They feel a compulsion, and I feel that myself, to go out and paint, to go out and do your thing. And it is going back to the whole thing of the bear, you know, putting your claw marks on the thing. It is just like saying, I'm here, I'm alive. So this is a good buddy of mine called Citizen Kane, although his real name's Dave Evans. And I think this is his masterpiece in Ghent, in Belgium. Is Ghent in Belgium? Anyway.
Yeah, it's Robert's hometown.
Is it? Okay, anyway, okay, well, great. So this is in Ghent. And Dave, he makes these sculptures out of clay, and then he does a cast of them, and then he makes the work itself out of like industrial moulding plaster, and then attaches them to the wall with dino bolts, and then paints on them. And he's often got his brother and his cousin working with him. So this piece took months to make, and about a week to install, and then unfortunately shortly afterwards they knocked the wall down. It's unbelievable. This is my favourite piece of this. So it's a good buddy of mine. And it's another one of his pieces that he did as a tribute to his son. Unfortunately died very young. And in Shoreditch, which is like sort of the capital of sort of street art in London. So this is like three-dimensional street art now. And then another form of street art is paste up. So there was a young friend of mine in Wellington operating under the name Bent, and he took photographs of local pigeons and he would blow them up really big on a whole lot of A3s and then stick them around town and try and get them up as high as he could. Once again, not doing it for the money, it's just the idea of, you know, bringing nature back into the city, and yeah, just the hell of it really. This is a Rise, a very famous paste-up artist, done big projects all over the world. So a lot of this stuff is very, very temporary. It's done with like wet paste, and you know, it's only going to look good for a week or so before it starts, you know, peeling off the wall. And so really the photo on the internet, you know, becomes the work pretty quickly. And there's also people doing stickers, of course. There's a whole sticker community out there, people just doing stickers. And it's not just a man's game. So, you know, a lot of people I think got the idea that street art is like a little thing with like boys with like spray cans like rock stars. There's a lot of really great female street artists out there as well. So this is Ariki, operating in Wellington, and this is one of her first pieces there. So when I was working in Wellington with the council there, I was trying to help make opportunities for people to get into the game, and particularly make safe spaces for people to learn how to spray paint and paint walls, and also to try and keep young people who've been caught tagging out of jail. So this is a Hero, who's a Belgian artist, who's done two amazing works in Dunedin. One is of a crowd scene and one's of a dress hanging on the wall down in the Vogel Street precinct. And she's one of my favourite artists, and yeah, unfortunately she died recently, which is very, very sad because she was absolute genius, I think. This is Faith 47, South African artist. So she's got her cherry picker here. So she's done a work in Dunedin, a couple hugging on sort of a little parking lot off St Andrew Street. So she's one of my favourite artists as well, absolutely fantastic work. So I'm just going to show you now how our work is done. So this is Flem working in Wellington. So I got permission to paint on this building and raise the money with the help of the local council. So in this building they used to repair, recondition and make old film projectors. So I said to Dan, can you do something about the history of like film projectors? So he came up with an idea of a head filled with like his guys, he's got these like trademark guys operating film projectors. So here he is, just standing on the wall, and what he's done, the first thing he's done is make a very, very simple grid. So he's broken the wall into four, and this is how a lot of people, including myself, work, is you make a very, very simple grid, and it tells you where the middle is, and it just helps you position yourself on the wall, because obviously you're so close to it, you can't see the whole thing. And so you need to have these reference points to be able to create the work. So here he is on day 2. So he's filling in his background now. Day 3. So he's already got his sketch he's working on from his, he's just looking at his hand or it's on his phone, just filling in his backgrounds. So a lot of these people, you know, they do this for a living and they're very, very fast. They're very fit. They really know what they're doing. This is day 4. So now we start to do the detailing. And this is the finished work, which is still in Wellington. So it's a whole lot of guys operating film projectors, and this one here is actually directly relates to one of the film projectors that was actually made in this building. So I helped organise a number of mural projects in Wellington, and this is one I'm most proud of, second most proud of, and it's a giant painting of Rita Angus. This is actually 23 metres high. It gives you no idea how big it is there. It took me 3 years to get the money and the permissions together from a 75-person body corporate to allow this painting to be painted on the wall, and it was way too big. It was out of my range. So this is a guy called Skew One, who's one of New Zealand's top guns. Spends most of the time overseas. While I helped produce the mural, he's the man that painted it. And so here he is, stuck up on his machine, because these things break down all the time. You need to have a head for heights, trust me. And in Wellington it's quite scary because you've got the wind, you've got earthquakes, and just about every time you use these things, they break down. So here it is, he's up there and he's broken down. So he had to wait like 3 hours for a guy to come along with another machine and rescue him. So this is just so typical of what it's like to be a street artist. So this is my all-time favourite piece in Wellington. So this is Citizen Kane, the guy I was talking about before. And I managed to bring him out from England. I raised a bunch of money, got permissions. So this is a building just behind the Rita Angus on Bond Street in Wellington. And this figure at the top is Kupe, the Māori hero, vanquishing the wheke, the octopus, to create Wellington Harbour. And so some of these pieces were actually made in a studio in Wellington out of clay, and then moulds were made, and then an industrial moulding plaster was used to make the finished pieces. And then a few of them Dave brought out with him. And then finally it was all dino bolted onto the wall, and then painted around. So I think this is a fantastic sort of fusion of sort of Dave's sort of cyber, Giga style with traditional, Māori art. So that's Dave and Stevie Halkamau, who's a local clay artist who created this piece in 2017. So it gives you an idea. So it's 6 metres high. So if you're in Wellington, check it out. It's just behind the Rita Angus. And so far none of it's fallen off. Both me and Dave live in fear of it falling off and killing someone. It hasn't happened yet. So it's a close-up. And there they are, Dave and Stevie, working on the wheke. So I also do a bit of painting myself. I don't think of myself as like a crank street artist or anything like that. I don't do it all the time. I've got other projects as well, but I do really enjoy it, painting in summer, and it helps sort of keep me a little bit fit, and yeah, I just enjoy doing it. And so I used to have a sort of background in marine science, so this is a painting of plankton with tiny whales, so giant plankton, tiny whales. And this is down by the waterfront by Ofura Bay in Wellington. So it gives you a better idea of. So it's actually quite a bit bigger. This is quite a bit more, other bits to it. So this is a piece. This is the first piece I painted in London, and this was an area where a guy called Faraday had his workshops, and he was one of the first pioneering electrical scientists, and he learned some of his early things about how to make batteries from studying electrical eels, electric rays and things like that. And so this is a mural just where his lab was, with electric fish, electric rays, etc. And unfortunately this building got knocked down last year, so it's not there anymore, but yeah, did that in 2012, so had a good run. That's a close-up of it. So it's done on brick. So a lot of the times when you're painting, you don't have a flat surface, you're painting on these very rough surfaces, so you need to adapt to whatever surface you're painting on. This is probably the biggest piece I've done Dunedin under the name of my alter ego, which I won't go into here. Unfortunately, it's got a lot of stuff in front of it these days and you can't see much of it. And this is based on the cover of the Chills album called Silver Bullets, which I also did. And so it's these sort of fish diving at the road. And this fascination with plankton continues. So this is me in Timaru a few years ago. And I just really like, as you can tell, I just really love with the ocean. And part of the way I operate is if people say, I've got a wall, can you paint something on it? I say, yeah, I'd love to, and I'll do it for a bit of cohort, or whatever you can afford, if I can paint an animal. And one of the things I do is I paint animals from this museum, specimens from this museum, particularly the animal attic. So these white sharks are not from the animal attic, but this wall up in Highgate, just about all these specimens here are from the animal attic. And so it's my dream to paint 100 specimens from the animal attic around town. So if you've got a wall that's got some public visibility, give me a yell. I put some flyers by the entrance there for my own little museum, Dunedin Museum of Natural Mystery. And if you want to get hold of me and talk about getting a small mural, I'd love to talk to you about it, if I could paint something from the museum. So this is like typically my style. I like using a lot of black and white as well, as Rowe and Flem do, because it's so damn fast. If you put a lot of colour in things, it just takes longer. And do you really get any more impact, than just using straight black and white? So a lot of people they push me to use colour, but if I'm doing it for cheap, so I think I did this for like $300 or something on the side of the Broadway Hall, I just really restrict my colour palette. So you might have seen this one in North East Valley, done for the Valley Collective of a Colorea Falcon. And I don't like painting people very much. I don't think I'm very good at it, but have done a few murals around town with people. I didn't do the one with Ed Sheeran. I should say no more. So that's Jones Chin outside the Crown Hotel. And one of the most recent murals was a mural on the side of the Victoria Hotel. Originally I wanted to paint Moa, and these lights above here, these lights are UV lights, and it's got UV paint in it, and at night these lights turn on, you can see different colours you can't see during the day. So I wanted to paint Moa, and at night you can see the Moa skeletons. But owners didn't like that idea, so the next idea was, can I paint bats? Can I paint New Zealand bats? And then COVID came along, and suddenly bats were off the table. So then it was owls, so it became owls. So that's what it looks like during the day. And then if you go down there, so this is back of Victoria Hotel, facing the back of the farmers' bus stops on Great King Street. And so at night, it looks like that, except much, much better, much, much brighter than that. And I've got a commission to do a building in town early next year, a whole building where we're going to do dinosaurs, and you're going to see the skeletons, so long as we get the resource consent. Because in Dunedin, you need a resource consent to do a mural over 10 metres square. As far as I know, it's one of the only cities in New Zealand where you actually need a resource consent to do a mural. Most murals only last like 10 years, 20 years if you're lucky. So why you need a resource consent, I don't know. So as well as painting, I've also explored other aspects of street art, and particularly paste up. And so I've always just hated those little boring utility structures that you see around town. So I went through a period where I would stick lichen and other sort of textures on them to try and sort of bring nature back into the city and sort of humanise the city. So there's actually a bunch of rabbit feces on some moss. But unfortunately, like a lot of my projects, there's no money to be made here. This is like a crazy black hole for pouring money into. But I feel quite sad I haven't continued with this project, and I may pick it up in the future. I just like the idea of it. And I also started doing a long-term poster campaign under this name, which I won't say too much about. And the idea was trying to get these posters up all around the world and talk about issues around the environment. So this one's in Paris. So this is the very first one. So very inspired by Shepard Fairey and his work with the Obey project. And just trying to so it's Antarctica, trying to get these things up all over the world. So this is like a side project. So if you see posters around Dunedin, I'm also involved in the postering thing. So I think that's my talk. So I hope you got some insight there as to sort of what I think anyway is the how sort of the graffiti involved, metamorphosized into this sort of modern art movement. Any questions? Yes.
Thank you, Bruce.
overwhelmed. Wonderful. Of course, I want to know, where is this big project that you're going to be doing? Where is it in Dunedin?
It's on the side of the Natural History New Zealand building, which is opposite the Oval. So it's been bought by a group called Southlink, who are like a medical group. So we're still to get the resource consent. So at the moment, we're just waiting to get consent.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah, no, it'd be great to be able to do that because it's something I've always wanted to do. Is to paint UV skeletons inside animals. So we had to get the paint shipped out from England and we had to get the lights sent over from Australia. So there's not too many of these UV things around. In fact, that one I did maybe the first one in the country, we're not sure. Any other questions or queries? Anyone like a mural on their wall? Do give me a yell. Yep.
Curious, I mean, probably people knocking down walls would be a bigger issue, but do you have to deal much with like UV degradation of paint over time? Do they change colour a lot?
Yeah, so spray cans particularly, they degrade very quickly and certain colours degrade faster than others. So like a lot of people, like in the beginning of street art, everyone was using spray cans and to use anything else was just seen as like passé. Now most street artists are back to using paint or hand painting or a mixture of spray cans and hand painting. And that's what I do. So I use like, for a lot of the background painting, a lot of the colour work, I'll use Resins paints and I'll use spray cans for the toning. And then if I really want the mural to last, I'll cover it in a stuff called Graffiti guard, and it's like coating it in urethane, and that cuts out a lot of the UV and it doubles the length of the mural. And if anyone tags it, you've got a bit of time to wipe it off. Well, as I said, I don't really have a beef with taggers too much because I'll probably get paid to go out and fix it up, or paint something else. They've got just as much right to exist as I do. Yeah.
I have a bit of a problem with taggers since my garage got tagged many years ago, and it really annoyed me, and I started to think bad thoughts about taggers, and I think they're vandals. I know they've got every right to be on the street, but I think they're the bottom end of the hierarchy.
Yeah, but I understand, like having been a young person myself, is like the FU to the bourgeois establishment, and they would see me, as bourgeois establishment. Although having said that, I have done murals around town, and people have tagged around the edges of them, and I think that's great to get that recognition.
Yeah, that's all right, but not on a residential building like mine.
Yeah, or your car. Yeah.
It's all about placement.
It is. Yeah.
Just wondering, in your experience, where in the world or in New Zealand do you enjoy the street art most?
Well, Christchurch. Christchurch is the place to go, and that's a lot of that is because of the earthquake and internal affairs. I can't remember how many years, but they were putting I think it was about 20,000 a year into big public art projects, and so that is why. And you've got all these buildings that are going to be demolished. And so Christchurch became like ground zero for the best gallery, I would say, in the country. Dunedin's obviously quite well known. Napier's is good. Auckland's good, but it's spread out. So I think Christchurch. Yeah. Yep.
I'm curious, actually, I grew up near Katikati, and that has a lot of murals, but they're kind of more, I guess, historical. Would they sort of fall under a different body of work to the kind of stuff you're talking about? Or?
Yeah, so you go to places like Waimani, and you've got these these old school traditional murals, which I still think as an old school artist myself, I still got a lot of respect for them if they're good. But these days there's a whole new sort of sensibility about it, and you can very much see a sort of a modern work from an old style work. And it is a little bit hard to what is that demarcation there, but once you know it, you sort of know it. But I've got no beef with a lot of that stuff, and some of the people that have done it, have done a very good job. Other pieces are very amateur. If you're trying to paint people, perspective, things like that, and you haven't been to art school, it's going to look pretty crap. And so a lot of being a good street artist is knowing, what you're good at and keeping away from the things, like I do, try and play to your strengths and try and avoid your weaknesses. Yep.
Thank you. That was phenomenal. I enjoyed it very much. I have a question about, so I know that street art and graffiti art might not have such clear distinctions, but a lot of people talk about the legality or state-sanctioned aspect of it is certainly part of it. What would you say that process, like the regulatory mechanism of that conversion to go through that change, how does that change the art?
Okay, well this is the fascinating question, and we could talk about this at length. So in Wellington, they had a big, we're completely down on tagging and unsanctioned artwork, and they've got a website called Stop Tags, and any council worker is supposed to take a photograph of any unsanctioned bit of work and upload it to this thing, and then because a lot of people are tagging the same tag all the time, and if they get caught on a camera, the police will go around and they'll go through, all these guys' sketchbooks and their Instagram, and they may put hundreds of charges on them, as has happened to people I know, and may throw them in jail. Okay, and so the work is seen as illegitimate. But however, if you paint something like, I don't know, there's a famous case in Wellington at a bus stop where I can't remember what it was, the subject matter, it might have been an all black or something like that. Something illegal was painted. But the community rallied round and said, hey, we like this. And so the community started becoming an advocate for the work. And basically that's what a lot of how the work becomes legitimate is locals start to advocate for it and say, we want this kept. And occasionally, much loved works do get buffed over. That happens. In fact, I'm about to replace one quite soon myself. A work that's been buffed over that people appreciate, try and put it back again. But a lot of it is public buy-in, and if you get enough public buy-in, it will transcend the bureaucratic mechanisms. If that makes sense. Yeah. So.
And just to follow on from that, from all of us who really, really appreciate the street art scene in Dunedin, and especially so many of the works that you have been involved with, like that Dell East Past Eagle was one of my favourites, but so many of the works that you have put up, mean so much to so many of us who live around the city, and we enjoy them every day. The black fish, to me, I pass that regularly every week. I enjoy the fish in Northeast Valley. I get such a kick that Ray Troll loves you.
Yeah, I get a huge kick out of that too. Yeah,
and it's just fantastic.
Yeah.
And that was a really great talk.
I think, we've been talking about collaborating on a project, Ray. I don't think it'll ever happen, but it's great to talk about it.
You get him out here, he loves New Zealand, so I'm sure he loves to come.
It'd be great to hang out with Ray. Yeah.
Super great. You bring so much, and I'm really interested.
Oh, look.
I'm really interested in that paste up with the lichens and things on the power boxes, and I'd really love to see more of those.
So would I. Yeah, I'd love to find a way to fund it.
And get other people on board.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Very accessible and really awesome.
Yeah. All right, so I think we'll wrap it up there, if that's all right. Anything going to last question? So thank you very, very much for coming, people. And do remember to vote, of course, for your mayor and your council workers, and of course your Otago Regional Council people. Do remember to vote. All right, thank you very much, people.
Bruce, on behalf of the Otago Museum, thank you. That was really enjoyable.
Good.
And regarding voting, there's the mural debate happening downstairs.